A father's life comes to a violent end.
Officers observed a large amount of blood and an obvious gunshot wound to his chest.
But the sole witness says it was a tragic accident.
He had the firearm in bed with him?
Yeah, and I just tried to move it.
He jerked and it went off.
The investigation reveals a murky history of mental health struggles.
I don't know the exact year that my father was diagnosed with bipolar disorder.
Depression increases the likelihood of suicidal ideation.
Until a deeper look into his personal life raises startling questions.
He didn't understand where the money was going.
There were discrepancies in the stories. He was looking for proof.
And evidence mounts that this was no mere accident.
We found plastic baggies that contained powder.
She said that he was crushing them up. Why would a grown man crush up pills to put into his food?
Leading investigators to a desperate killer who'll go to any length to get what they want.
They conducted a search for top 10 most deadly poisons to humans.
It was hard to understand. Did you always have this plan?
They felt he was worth more dead than he was alive.
The small town of Lexington, South Carolina is known for its family-friendly atmosphere.
There's lots of great schools. There are fun things for families to do. It's a really great place to live.
Though it is one of the fastest growing areas in South Carolina, nights in Lexington are usually peaceful. But that isn't the case on November 30th, 2016.
At approximately 1:42 a.m., our 911 communication center received a call.
Lexington County 911, state the address of your emergency.
I need an ambulance right away. My husband was asleep and his gun was beside him and it went off. I don't know what to do.
He shot himself?
Yes. Please hurry. Please stop breathing.
The 911 caller was Kimberly Groh.
During the course of the call, the 911 dispatcher learns that Kimberly Groh's husband is Michael Bryan.
Okay, then where did he get shot at?
His chest area, I think. He's laying over it. He's rolled over. Can I move him?
No, ma'am, do not move him.
Oh, please.
All right, okay. Stay on the line. I have a few more questions for you. Where's the gun at?
It's on the bed.
Officers arrived on scene. Within minutes, they were met by Kimberly Groh. She was distraught.
When the officers enter the bedroom, they find the scene much as Kimberly described.
Michael was laying on the right side of the bed. On his left side, officers observed a rifle that was pointing towards him, but pretty much at a 45-degree angle on the left side of the bed. They walked around the foot of the bed and observed a large amount of blood and an obvious gunshot wound to his chest.
He has his arm laid across a blue towel with a remote control in his right hand. They did not get a pulse from Michael. They were able to determine that Michael was not alive anymore.
Lexington police encounter hunting accidents every season, but a man shooting himself in his own bed is a rare occurrence, especially with a rifle.
Due to the fact that it was initially reported and believed to be a suicide, each individual piece of evidence had to be scrutinized. As an investigator, you would want to try to figure out why that person would want to harm themselves. However, the rifle laying on the bed was very odd. Nobody sleeps with a rifle in their bed. Also because of how far he would have had to reach to pull the trigger. That alone didn't say that it was not a suicide, but it's very uncommon to see people use a long gun or a rifle to commit suicide.
The responding officers asked Kimberly if there was anyone else in the house other than Michael, and she said that her daughter was upstairs in her bedroom asleep at the time.
Kimberly's daughter from a previous marriage, she was asleep in bed, and once she was awakened, the officers escorted her outside of the residence.
Once backup arrives, the officers put Kimberly and her daughter in a car while the house is secured for investigators.
We treat all suspicious deaths, which would include a suicide, as a crime until proven otherwise, whether you believe it's suicide or it is an accident. It's important to keep an open mind in any investigation.
Michael Bryan was born on October 11th, 1961 in Charlotte, North Carolina. His early years were marked by a love of family, God, and the outdoors.
My dad had 2 older sisters and 1 younger sister. He was a handful. He loved to have fun, and he loved to help people since he was little. Faith was the centerpiece of my dad's life. He was raised up with a strong faith from my grandfather and my grandma. I think my father thoroughly enjoyed the great outdoors just because he got to see God's beautiful earth and just sit there and listen to the animals.
As he grew older, Michael's interests expanded into more practical pursuits.
After high school, Michael trained to be a plumber. In 1999, he opened his own plumbing company here in Lexington, South Carolina.
My dad and my mom, I'm not exactly sure when they got married, but my father had my brother in 91, and I was born in 94. It was a happy household. My dad was always in a good mood, and that mood was contagious. As a family, we did a lot together. We'd go to church, obviously, and we'd go out on the lake. We'd go camping. We were very close.
Although he was an ideal father, Michael struggled in his marriage.
My father always expressed to me that he loved my mother, but things had just changed. I was in middle school when they finally divorced. When my parents divorced, actually, my father had sole custody of us both, but I would see my mom. I really looked up to my dad for stepping up and being a single dad, and he was at every basketball game. He was at every football game for my brother in the marching band.
Michael divided his time between raising his boys and building up his plumbing business.
Michael did work in the Lexington area and all over the state. It was a pretty profitable business for him at the time.
Despite his career success, the life of a single father grew lonely for 46-year-old Michael. By 2007, 2 years after his divorce, he was ready to try again at love.
When my dad told me he was on eHarmony, it was surprising, but it also was geared for men like him. Find another person who's into their faith as much as you are. I was probably 13 when Kim and my dad met.
Michael was new to dating, but 41-year-old Kimberly Fletcher Groh seemed to be everything he was looking for in a woman.
She was a single mom that was strong in her faith and hardworking and loving and caring. I think she checked a lot of the boxes that my dad was looking for. She had a sense of humor, and family meant most to her. I thought she was a nice woman, and she made my dad happy. That's really all that mattered. Kim had 2 daughters. One was much older, and then one was younger than me.
Like Michael, Kim ran her own business, renting out properties she owned in the area. Before long, she was helping Michael manage his company as well.
Kimberly joined Michael in the plumbing business, taking over the finances and the bookkeeping.
When Kim stepped into the business, I think everything kind of grew exponentially, and we were doing really well. And I think it was purely because Kim was there, and she was smart, and she was hardworking.
In 2008, after a year and a half together, they decided to get married.
Their wedding was local, and it was mainly family there. My father and Kim had a great relationship, and they loved each other very strongly, and they were supportive of each other and growing.
Now, their happy home has been torn apart by Michael's stunning apparent suicide.
They began speaking with Kimberly Groh concerning the events that had transpired. So officers got verbal statements from her that were recorded on body camera about what had happened.
I just tried to move it so he wouldn't be in bed with it.
He had the firearm in bed with him?
Yeah, and I just tried to move it.
Despite what she told 911, Kimberly says Michael didn't take his own life. According to her, the gun went off by accident.
The barrel was pointed up toward him?
Yeah, I tried to grab the bottom, and he jerked it back, and it went off.
When officers learned that it was Kimberly's hand that was on the gun when the gun went off, that changes the trajectory of the investigation.
After speaking with Kimberly Groh, police question her 17-year-old daughter as well. She tells them she was asleep when the shooting happened and doesn't remember hearing the gun go off, leaving no one to corroborate Kim's version of events.
Now investigators have a more keen interest in investigating whether that's what actually happened.
The difference between a suicide and an accident are night and day. How do you confuse the two?
Coming up, Kimberly gives investigators a detailed account of the accident.
She actually did a drawing of the bed and location of the gun.
Investigators must question if any of it is true.
I've seen suicides. I've been to homicides. I knew something about this scene was just not adding up.
After hearing Kimberly Groh's initial statement about her husband's death, Lexington police open an official investigation.
Kimberly now has to be ruled out as having any sort of malicious intent and potentially intentionally killing Michael. So officers are obviously very interested in bringing Kimberly in to conduct an interview with the detectives with the Lexington Police Department.
It's not unusual for people who have experienced a traumatic event to not exactly have the exact facts. So we continue to just let her try to pin down the best that she could exactly what had happened.
Can you kind of go over what happened, starting with yesterday morning when you guys got up?
Well, he didn't get up. He's bipolar. Yesterday, he stayed in bed all day.
Kimberly said that this type of behavior from Michael was something that had been ongoing but had been getting worse over time.
I don't know the exact year that my father was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but I believe he'd probably always struggled with it. He kept most of that stuff to himself and didn't want to seem moody.
Bipolar can be triggered by extremely stressful events, which may trigger an episode, whether it is mania or depression.
When asked what could have prompted this behavior, Kimberly explains that Michael's passion has always been hunting. And his latest depression was caused by tremors, which prevented him from shooting accurately.
He has been really obsessive over the fact that he hadn't been able to hit a deer.
So he shot at him? He shot at deer and just hasn't been able to?
This year, and that's unusual.
Kimberly says it also caused Michael to obsess over his guns.
Kimberly told law enforcement that Michael would consistently leave guns laying around the house. She didn't know if they were loaded or not, but she was afraid that something like this might happen.
And so he started laying them in the bedroom, and they were laying everywhere.
When someone's going through depression, they are more likely to be fatigued, not wanting to engage in activities of daily living.
Kimberly had advised us that Michael had pretty much slept all day while she had run a whole bunch of errands.
Kimberly says when she came home later that day, Michael was still in bed.
He hasn't had an episode where he stayed in bed a lot in the last couple months.
Okay.
And I made dinner, and I woke him at 8 o'clock and said, "It's 8 o'clock, you need to eat dinner."
Okay. And what kind of, so you heated up like a
roast beef meal. He said, "Okay, I'll eat now." And he had me get him his medicine and bring it to him.
Kimberly says they watched TV together before falling asleep. She remembers getting up around 1 a.m. to let the dog out, and when she returned, she was met with a disturbing sight.
And I walked in the bedroom, the TV was on, and the gun was on the bed.
was the gun on the bed before you got up? Like,
no, I wasn't been sleeping with the gun.
She obviously was concerned for Michael's safety.
I was like, Michael, why is the gun in the bed, Michael? He just moaned, and I went to pull it, and he jerked, and he went off.
As he jerked, did he actually grab the gun?
I don't know. It jerked me back, and I dropped it on the bed.
Kimberly says she can't be sure how the gun went off. It's possible Michael's finger was on the trigger when she moved it.
Anytime you have firearms, there's always the potential for accidents to happen. And they do happen, unfortunately, on a pretty frequent basis.
If you have to cry, you have to. I mean, it's a tough situation, okay?
I don't know why it just looked like that.
Kim's attitude during her interview was she was cooperative. She made a written statement. She actually did a drawing of the actual bed and location of the gun and orientation to the room. She allowed photos to be taken of her. They noticed that she had a small abrasion on her forehead. She stated that when the gun went off, it hit her in the head.
They hold Kimberly in a room for further questioning. Although investigators find her to be cooperative, they do have some questions regarding her story. One of them is why Michael brought a loaded rifle to bed in the first place.
Depression increases the likelihood that someone is to have thoughts of suicidal ideation, which would also help explain why there could have been a weapon in bed.
But since Michael cannot speak for himself, investigators must find evidence that corroborates Kimberly's story. They obtain a search warrant for the house.
Nothing really jumped out to me. There was no struggle that had taken place. I made my way down the hallway. I went into the bedroom.
The coroner has not arrived yet, so Michael's body is still at the scene.
In South Carolina, we don't touch the body until the coroner's office arrives on scene. So while I'm waiting, I observed Michael lying on his left side. The only visible injuries that we could see at that point in time was a single gunshot wound to his chest. The rifle found on the bed was a Winchester .223. I observed the rifle laying at that 45-degree angle that it was pointed toward him. It appeared to be fairly close.
They find various other firearms as well, just as Kimberly said they would. However, none of them are loaded with ammunition.
It tells me that Michael knew his way around guns and, wouldn't store a weapon with ammunition in it.
To detectives, it means the rifle Michael took to bed was loaded for a reason. The question remains whether he did it himself.
I had 25 years of public safety experience. I've seen suicides. I've been to homicides. I knew something about this scene was just not adding up.
Detectives are searching the Brian Groh home for evidence regarding 55-year-old Michael Bryan's death. They collect all the electronic devices in the house, hoping those might provide some answers.
So in this case, phones that belonged to Kimberly, to Michael, laptops, and iPads were collected and analyzed by forensic digital analysts.
The analysis will take days to complete. In the meantime, police continue their search.
During our search, we also located a life insurance policy.
Investigators learned that Michael had a $500,000 life insurance policy on his life that Kimberly was the sole beneficiary of.
To seasoned investigators, a substantial life insurance policy hints at a motive to murder Michael. And in the garage, they find another curious piece of evidence.
We moved on to Kimberly Groh's vehicle. Her purse was in her car. Within her purse, investigator located an eyeglass case, and within the eyeglass case, he found plastic baggies that contained capsules, and some baggies contained powder. We discovered that they were sedatives that were commonly used to treat insomnia.
Michael was known to take the drug temazepam, which matches the description. When they ask Kimberly about it, she provides an innocent explanation.
Kimberly told investigators that earlier that morning, on the 29th, that she had taken those pills from Michael, that he was crushing them up.
She stated to the investigator that that was because Michael had been abusing his medication, and that he had been opening capsules and sprinkling it on his food. It didn't close the door to my questions, just absolutely made everything even more questionable.
Despite their doubts, investigators have nothing to hold her on. Though Kimberly is allowed to leave, detectives are beginning to wonder if anything she's told them can be trusted.
Why would a grown man crush up his pills to put into his food instead of just popping it, like taking a capsule? That would be a lot easier. Anytime you're investigating the death of someone, you don't leave any stone unturned. In this case, they found food in the trash can that Kimberly had indicated that Michael had eaten earlier that evening. The investigators took that food into evidence to be tested later by the toxicologist.
Investigators reach out to the Bryans' loved ones for more information on Kimberly and Michael's marriage.
Everybody that we spoke with said that Kimberly was a good wife, that she had been taking care of Michael while he was suffering through a little bit of depression, and that she had also been busy running the business. So we spoke to one of Michael's friends, and he said that Michael had been down on himself lately about his ability to shoot his rifle, that he had missed a couple of deer this year, pretty much kind of depressed over the whole situation.
But opinions are mixed on the state of Michael's mental health. His son John refutes claims that he was depressed over hunting.
He could go to the woods, not see anything, and come home super excited because he got to sit out there in the peace and quiet. And so I don't think he'd get that upset over missing a deer. Honestly, there were conversations with my father about his emotions where he would say he'd have thoughts that scared him, but he truly felt suicide is the most selfish thing you can do. He would have never done that.
When asked by investigators whether they ever knew Michael to crush up his medications and put them in his food, all of his friends and family members indicated that they had never seen Michael do that. Investigators spoke with a number of Michael's hunting buddies who all indicated that Michael was always very safe with the handling of the guns and the storage of the guns that he had, and that he never left them loaded.
Michael's brother-in-law, Jerry, says he knows how careful Michael is, so he was surprised by a text from Kimberly in the days leading up to the shooting.
According to Jerry, Kimberly indicated that Michael was leaving guns lying around the house in a reckless manner, and that he was even falling asleep with guns in the bed with him. A week prior to the shooting, Kimberly did approach him and ask him about how to operate and render safe the specific rifle that was used, the .223 Winchester.
Investigators wonder why Kimberly didn't make sure the safety was on before she tried to move the rifle. An interview with the couple's pastor provides them with a possible answer.
Their pastor told investigators that he had spoken to Michael on multiple occasions.
He said they had a large amount of money coming in, but they also had an even larger amount of money going out. He didn't understand where the money was going.
Michael had confided to Pastor Ken that Kimberly was stealing from the business.
There were discrepancies in the stories that Kim was telling him about the day-to-day in the business. I could see how much it was hurting him, and I kind of put together that he was looking for proof. He was trying to determine that he was being lied to on a daily basis. Tensions were high, for sure.
Was there financial things going on that maybe they couldn't take anymore, and maybe they just reached a breaking point?
Coming up, a marriage full of secrets and lies.
She had wrote that their marriage was crumbling.
And investigators find evidence of a murder plot.
She conducted a search for how to poison your spouse and go undetected.
Given this new information from a trusted source, the Groh family's pastor, investigators collect Kimberly Groh's personal journal for further insight on the state of their marriage.
There were recent entries where she expressed frustration with Michael's bipolar disorder, that it was becoming a burden on her. She was also expressing that she didn't believe that Michael was necessarily in love with her anymore, that she was in love with Michael.
She had wrote that she felt like her and Michael were growing distant and that their marriage was crumbling.
Obviously, it's when you have a death of a spouse and you have indications that the marriage may have been on the rocks, that's always going to add to the suspicion.
Kimberly's search history paints an even clearer picture of a woman desperately looking for a way out.
During the forensic analysis of the electronic devices that belonged to Kimberly, investigators learned that in May of 2016, she conducted a search for how to poison your spouse and go undetected. Then later, much closer to the time of the incident, on November 1st, Kimberly searches top 10 most deadly poisons to humans.
Investigators find irregularities between their personal and business accounts, but aren't able to confirm any theft. However, there is a record of Kimberly placing an online order for arsenic.
She orders arsenic to be delivered to the business that's located next to her business, which was also suspicious to investigators.
While they await Michael's toxicology reports, investigators focus on the gunshot wound that killed him.
During further analysis of the electronic devices, investigators found a search for how to operate the .223 Winchester rifle. So this also adds to the suspicion that just a few weeks prior to the shooting using a .223 Winchester, she's searching on the internet how to operate that specific gun. The coincidences are really starting to stack pretty high, and investigators are fairly convinced that this was not an accident.
At this point in time, we now are believing this is absolutely a premeditated murder.
After collecting a mountain of circumstantial evidence, police confront Kimberly with their findings. Once again, she seems to have an answer for everything.
One of the common themes that you pick up on is that Kimberly oftentimes thinks that she is the smartest person in the room. Investigators also asked her about the search that she did for the .223 Winchester. She indicated that was because Michael was leaving these guns lying around the house, so she wanted to be able to make sure that she knew how to render these weapons safe.
In regards to the search about ways to kill a spouse without detection, she stated that she was interested in crime dramas and TV shows.
Kimberly explained to the investigators that the reason she ordered the arsenic was because she was going to use it as a cleaning solution for the pipes in their plumbing business.
She had no nervousness. Any one of those could have potentially been plausible, but the more that she spoke and the more things that she said, the more questions we had. In investigations, you want to, what we refer to as, lock them into a story as soon as possible. If the evidence doesn't go with what they're telling you, you know that there's something missing.
But when detectives asked Kimberly if she'd be willing to take a polygraph test, her confidence evaporates.
And I think she had that aha moment when we asked her to take a polygraph, that she realized, wait, they think I did this. And it caused her to stop and request an attorney. Based off all the evidence that we had thus far, absolutely moved her from being just a innocent widow and witness to a suspect.
Police are 4 months into the investigation of the death of 55-year-old Michael Bryan. Kimberly Groh had ample defense for her suspicious behavior leading up to his death. So now, investigators must try to refute her claims.
We went to several master plumbers, and they could think of no situation or no mixture or no concoction where any plumber would ever want to use arsenic.
Police hope Michael's toxicology report will prove whether Kimberly had a different use for the poison. Dr. Janice Ross conducts the autopsy.
Arsenic it's sort of a natural mineral. The normal person may have as much as 1 microgram of arsenic. Michael Bryan had 39 micrograms, which is higher than it should be, but it's not lethal. That amount of arsenic probably came from somebody putting it in his food or drink.
I think potentially what she wanted to do was try to slowly poison Michael with arsenic, and that she actually did so over a period of time. And I believe arsenic played a role to explain some of his physical ailments that he was experiencing. And I believe it just wasn't a lethal amount because she wasn't sure how much to give him.
It's found that Michael had temazepam and temazepam pills inside his stomach.
The food that we had seized out of the trash can that Kimberly had fed him that night also included positive result for containing temazepam.
This analysis points in the direction of her now having intentionally medicated him prior to her shooting him.
To prove the shooting could not have been an accident, detectives turn to pathologists and ballistic experts.
In this case, the deceased was shot in the chest. When a bullet comes out of a gun, so does powder and soot. But the powder and soot only go a certain distance depending on the caliber, the length of the rifle, barrel, the type of ammunition. With the stippling as large as it was, indicated to me that the barrel of the gun was a fair distance away from the person. In this case, it turned out to be 12 inches.
One of the things Kimberly said was that Michael had reached down and pushed the trigger himself, but it wasn't a close contact wound. That further solidified and took off the table that Michael had anything to do with pulling the trigger. It would just be too far of a distance for him to reach.
As far as investigators are concerned, it's irrefutable proof Kimberly murdered her husband. And a blood spatter expert reveals evidence that before calling 911, she staged the crime scene to look like an accident.
It was observed that blood had been running out of the bullet wound.
Blood is always going to flow in the direction of gravity. So in Michael's case, the blood that was on his chest initially went straight down, which would indicate that he was sitting up in the bed. However, the blood pattern then begins to turn, which indicates that during the course of him bleeding out, that his body moved from an upright position to now a laying on his side position. So this all indicates that he was potentially manipulated after he had been shot.
If there was any doubt left who pulled the trigger, it vanishes once DNA tests are performed on the rifle.
The DNA analysis from the trigger of the gun comes back as a DNA match for Kimberly.
Despite the mountain of evidence, investigators must be sure they have a case that can get a conviction at court.
So we've now reached a point in the investigation where it's becoming clear that if Kimberly did plan a murder, she certainly didn't plan it very well with all the loose ends that she left untied. So they didn't want to get the arrest warrant before we believed that we had enough to prove her guilty beyond a reasonable doubt at trial.
Months after the death of Michael Bryant, investigators believe they have enough evidence to prove he was murdered by his wife, Kimberly Groh.
I think that night was clearly premeditated. I believe that Kimberly waited for Michael either to go to sleep or she medicated him to the point that he passed out. And she took his gun, she loaded it, and she shot him in the chest from the foot of the bed.
However, investigators theorize not everything went smoothly.
When our officers first encountered Kimberly Groh, they noticed that she had a small abrasion on her forehead.
I think it could have been that she had the scope up and she didn't have it firmly seated in her shoulder. And if you don't have that firmly seated, when it fires, it kicks back and it's what you call scoped. You know, you get hit with the rim, the metal rim of the scope, and it leaves a mark.
If we ruled out domestic violence or self-defense, we can look at money issues or for financial gains.
That obviously points you in the direction of the $500,000 life insurance policy that he had.
Phone records show Kimberly called their insurance company to cash in the day after Michael's death. The call was recorded through the insurance company.
When you get in call centers that say this call may be recorded for quality assurance, well, guess what? They're recorded. Go listen to them.
Sorry to hear about the passing of your husband.
His name is Michael Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N.
She didn't seem upset when she was calling the life insurance company. She just was monotone. She had no emotion. I absolutely believe that Kimberly felt that Michael was worth more dead than he was alive.
Further investigation reveals she also had Michael's sons written out of his will.
We were not going to get anything, and that was shocking to not only me and my brother, but the entire Bryan family. Everything he did in life was for his family. Why would he write me and my brother out?
I think a combination of greed and the burden that Michael's bipolar disorder that she felt led her to snap and kill her husband, Michael.
After all the evidence came back, we were able to obtain an arrest warrant for Kimberly Groh for the commission of murder of Michael Bryan. We made arrangements through her attorney, and she turned herself in to us on September 26th.
COVID delays Kimberly's trial for over a year. But when the time finally comes, she chooses not to face a jury.
We were able to reach a plea agreement with Kimberly's defense attorney that she would enter an offered plea to voluntary manslaughter. And after the presentation by the state, and after hearing the emotional testimony of Michael's family, the judge ended up imposing the maximum 30-year sentence.
It was hard to understand. I still sometimes wonder how you do that. How do you go from loving him to that? Did you always have this plan?
I think Kimberly Groh has an absolute disregard for human life. I think that she was selfish. I think that she was greedy. And I think she was cold-blooded. I think Kimberly thought she could get away with murder.
My father loved Kim. He loved her with everything he had. And I just, it's hard to wrap my head around how she responded to that. It's affected the entire family in ways I think will live on with us. I believe my father would be proud of all of us and the way we've carried on. He will live on through us and the impact he made on all of us.
It starts with a door that never opened again. March 1998, California. A quiet suburban street where nothing ever happened until something did, and no one saw it coming. The kind of neighborhood where people left their porch lights on not out of fear, but out of habit. Lawns trimmed, curtains drawn at night, familiar faces, trusted routines. And then silence. At 7:42 p.m., a call comes in. A husband, his voice uneven, breaking between words. He says his wife didn't pick up their daughter from dance practice. That's not like her. Not even close. He says the house is unlocked, lights still on, dinner untouched. The dispatcher asks the question that always comes first. Sir, when was the last time you saw her? There's a pause. Too long. Then, this morning. The patrol car arrives within minutes. No forced entry. No broken glass.
No overturned furniture.
Just a stillness that feels wrong the moment you step inside. The air is heavy. Something is missing, but nothing looks out of place. Her purse is on the counter.
Keys inside.
Phone beside it. Shoes by the door.
People don't just vanish like that.
Her name is not spoken loudly at first. Detectives walk the house slowly, carefully, as if the truth might be hiding in the corners. The bedroom untouched. The bathroom dry. A coffee mug half full on the kitchen counter, cold now, abandoned mid-morning. Time stopped here hours ago. Neighbors gather in clusters outside. Whispers spread faster than facts. Someone says they saw a car earlier. Someone else says they heard nothing.
No screams. No struggle.
Just absence. A missing person report is filed before midnight. But something about this feels different. By the next morning, the word starts circulating quietly among investigators. Cold case in the making. Too clean. Too quiet. Too precise. And then comes the first crack in the surface. A patrol officer notices it. A faint smear near the back hallway. Barely visible unless the light hits it just right. It's not large. Not dramatic. But it shouldn't be there. They call it in. Forensics arrives. The smear becomes evidence.
Blood.
Not enough to confirm what happened. Not enough to tell a story. but enough to suggest that whatever occurred in that house wasn't voluntary. The husband is brought in for questioning. He sits under fluorescent lights, hands folded too tightly. He answers everything, cooperates, repeats timelines, morning coffee, a quick goodbye. Nothing unusual.
No argument. No tensión.
No reason. He says she was happy. Everyone says that.
Friends. Family.
Neighbors. The kind of woman who remembers birthdays. The kind who waves first. The kind you trust. Especially the kind of person who doesn't just disappear. Days pass. Then weeks. Search teams comb nearby fields. Volunteers walk shoulder to shoulder across dry grass and wooded patches. Helicopters scan from above. Dogs track scents that fade into nothing. No body.
No witnesses. No answers.
The case begins to slip. And that's when suspicion starts to shift. Because when there's no evidence, attention turns inward.
To the people closest.
The ones who knew her. The ones who were there. The husband remains calm. Too calm, some say. But calm isn't a crime. There's no physical evidence tying him to anything. No motive strong enough. No timeline that breaks. So investigators widen the circle. They talk to coworkers, friends, neighbors. And one name comes up more than once. A man who lives 2 houses down. Friendly, helpful, always around. The kind of neighbor who offers to fix a fence. The kind who brings in your trash bins if you're away. The kind who knows your schedule without asking.
Trusted.
His name doesn't raise alarms at first. Why would it? He volunteers information freely. Says he saw her that morning. Briefly. Just a wave. Nothing unusual. He seems cooperative.
Open.
But something lingers. It's not what he says. It's how easily he says it. Detectives take note. Then they move on. Because there's nothing concrete. Nothing that sticks. Weeks turn into months. The case cools. Files stack. Leads dry up. Tips fade into dead ends. The media loses interest. The headlines shrink. The urgency dissolves into routine. Another missing woman. Another story without an ending. Another cold case. But cold doesn't mean forgotten. Years pass. Technology changes. Methods evolve. Evidence, once considered insignificant, begins to matter again. And somewhere, buried in storage, that faint smear, the one barely visible in the hallway, waits. It sits in a sealed bag, labeled, logged, preserved. A fragment of a moment no one fully understood.
Until now.
Early 2000s. DNA analysis advances. Faster. More precise. More powerful than ever before. Old cases are reopened. Evidence re-examined. The past dragged back into the light. And this case, quiet, unresolved, lingering in the background, returns to the table. The smear is tested again. This time, it speaks. Not loudly, not completely, but enough. A partial profile. Not the victim. Not the husband. Someone else. Unknown. For years, that profile sits in databases. Compared. Cross-checked. Run again and again against new entries. Nothing. Until one day, it hits. A match. But not a direct one. A familial link. Distant, but undeniable. The kind of connection that doesn't point to a person immediately, but narrows the field. A genetic echo. A breadcrumb. Investigators follow it. Family trees are built. Names surface. Relationships mapped. And slowly, carefully, one line leads somewhere unexpected. Back to the street. Back to the house. Back to the neighbor. The trusted one. The man who waved that morning. The man who offered help. The man who was always around. Suddenly, everything shifts. Detectives revisit old interviews. Listen again to recorded statements. Study every word, every pause, every detail that once seemed ordinary. Patterns emerge. Small inconsistencies. Tiny fractures in a story told too smoothly. Why was he awake so early? Why did he remember that morning so clearly when others didn't? Why did he insert himself into conversations that didn't involve him? Questions that once meant nothing now feel heavy. They bring him in again. Years older, same calm demeanor. He doesn't seem surprised. He answers questions the same way, polite, measured, cooperative. But this time, they have something he doesn't expect. DNA. Not enough to convict, but enough to confront. The room changes. The air tightens. For the first time, his answers slow down. Just slightly. Just enough. Detectives press harder. They don't accuse. Not yet. They suggest. They imply. They let silence do the work. And then something breaks. Not a confession. Not fully.
But a shift.
A crack in the mask. He changes his story. Says maybe he did see more that day. Maybe he spoke to her longer. Maybe he went inside. The timeline bends. And once it bends, it doesn't stop. New search warrants are issued. His house is examined.
Carefully, thoroughly.
Years of dust. Years of change. Renovations. Repairs. Replacements. But traces remain. Microscopic. Hidden. Waiting. More evidence surfaces. Fragments. Enough to rebuild a moment long erased. A confrontation. An escalation. A struggle that didn't last long, but long enough. The house that once felt safe becomes something else entirely. A scene. A secret. And the silence that followed wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. Calculated.
Cold.
The community hears the news like a shockwave. The neighbor. Not a stranger. Not a drifter. Not someone passing through. Someone who lived among them. Someone they trusted. Someone who watched. For years. The arrest comes quietly.
No sirens, no spectacle.
Just a man taken from the same street where it all began. Neighbors watch from behind curtains this time. The same curtains that once stayed open. No one waves. No one speaks. Because now they're asking themselves a different question. How well do you really know the person next door? And the answer comes too late. The case that once faded into silence is suddenly everywhere again. Headlines return. California 1998 cold case solved. But solved doesn't mean finished. Because even with a name, even with a face, even with evidence that finally speaks, something is still missing. Her voice. Her story. The years lost. The truth buried under time. And as the case moves forward, as courtrooms fill and testimonies unfold, one thing remains unchanged. That house. Still standing. Still quiet. Still holding the echo of a moment that shattered everything. A door that never opened again. And a silence that lasted decades before finally breaking. The arrest doesn't bring relief. It brings noise. News vans line the street before sunrise. Camera crews step over the same sidewalks where children once rode bikes. Microphones stretch toward anyone willing to speak, and even those who aren't. The quiet neighborhood, once defined by routine, becomes a stage. Did you know him? Did you ever suspect anything? The answers are always the same.
No. But the word feels fragile now.
Like something that can't be trusted. Inside the police station, the atmosphere is different. Controlled. Focused. Years of silence replaced by urgency. Detectives who once filed the case away now stand over it again, flipping through evidence that suddenly feels alive. The man at the center of it all sits in an interrogation room that hasn't changed in decades. Same walls. Same table. Same light overhead. Too bright. Too unforgiving. He looks smaller now. Not physically, but something about him has shifted. The confidence that once came easily now flickers. His eyes move more. His hands don't stay still as long. Across from him, the detectives don't rush. They've waited years for this moment. They start slow. They revisit the past like a story he already knows. March 1998. The morning. The wave across the driveway. The quiet street. He nods. Yes, he remembers. Of course he remembers. But memory is dangerous now. Because this time, it's not just his. They place photos on the table. The house. The hallway. The smear that started it all. He looks at it longer than expected. Not shock. Not confusion. Recognition. It's subtle. Almost nothing. But in a room like this, almost nothing becomes everything. They slide another file forward. DNA results. Not complicated. Not technical. Just a simple truth, his genetic marker, woven into a moment he once claimed he barely witnessed. Silence fills the space between them. And silence, in interrogation, is never empty. It presses. It weighs. It forces the mind to move where words won't. He exhales slowly. Then he speaks. Not a confession.
Not yet.
But the story changes again.
He says he went inside that day.
Just briefly. She invited him in. That's new. That was never said before. Detectives don't react. They let him continue.
He says they talked.
Casual. Nothing serious. Just neighbors being neighbors. Then he stops. Because the next part matters. And he knows it. They wait. Minutes pass. The clock ticks louder than it should. Finally, there was an argument. The words land hard. Not loud, not dramatic, but irreversible. Once spoken, they reshape everything. He says it wasn't supposed to happen, that it escalated too fast, that voices were raised, that something was said, he doesn't specify what, and then he gestures with his hands. A vague motion. A struggle without detail. But the detectives don't need detail yet. They need truth. And truth is starting to surface, piece by piece. They ask one question. What happened next? He doesn't answer immediately. His eyes drop to the table. For the first time, he looks tired. Not physically, but mentally. Like he's been carrying something too heavy for too long. When he finally speaks, his voice is lower. She fell. It's a familiar phrase. Too familiar. An explanation used too often in rooms like this. But the detectives don't challenge it.
Not yet.
They let it sit. Because they know this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of the real one. Search teams return to the properties connected to him, not just his house but the spaces around it, the backyard, the garage, the areas no one thought to question years ago. Ground-penetrating radar scans the soil. Every inch becomes suspect. Every shadow becomes a possibility. Neighbors watch again, but this time with distance.
Doors stay closed.
Conversations happen in hushed tones. Because now, the fear isn't about what happened. It's about how close it was. Days pass. Then, a discovery. Not dramatic, not immediate, but undeniable. Buried beneath layers of dirt and time, something surfaces. Fragments. Remains. The search stops. The air changes. For the first time in years, there is a location. A place where absence becomes presence again. Forensic teams move in with precision. Careful. Methodical. Because this isn't just evidence. It's someone's life. And as the remains are recovered, the weight of the case shifts completely. No longer a disappearance. No longer a question. Now, it's a crime with a voice. Back in the interrogation room, the tone changes. The detectives return with what they've found. They don't show everything. Just enough. Enough to remove any illusion left. He sees it in their faces before they say a word. Something has been uncovered. Something final. And in that moment, whatever resistance he had begins to collapse. The story changes again. This time, there's no hesitation.
No pauses. No careful wording.
It comes out faster now. Messier. Closer to truth. He admits the argument turned physical. He admits losing control. He admits that what happened in that house wasn't an accident. But even now, he avoids certain words. He doesn't say killed. He doesn't say murder. He circles around them, as if language itself might trap him. Detectives let him talk, because the more he speaks, the less control he has. Details emerge.
Moments.
Actions. Choices made in seconds that stretched into decades. And then, the part that changes everything. What he did after. The cover. The silence. The decision to make it look like nothing happened. To walk out of that house and return to normal. To wave at neighbors. To speak to police. To stand among search parties looking for someone he already knew would never be found. That's the part that chills the room. Not the act itself, but what followed. The calculation. The patience. The ability to live beside a secret for years without breaking. When the interrogation ends, the man who walks out isn't the same one who walked in. Because now, the truth is no longer buried. It's documented. Recorded. Irreversible. Charges are filed. The case moves forward. And the community, once desperate for answers, now faces something harder. Understanding. Because solving a case doesn't erase it. It doesn't undo the years. It doesn't restore what was lost. It simply replaces one question with another.
Why?
Why her? Why that moment? Why someone so close? The courtroom becomes the next stage. Evidence is presented piece by piece. The timeline reconstructed. The story laid out in full view. And as it unfolds, the narrative that once felt impossible becomes undeniable. The trusted neighbor. The familiar face. The man who blended into the background. Now stands at the center of everything. But even as the case progresses, even as the truth becomes clearer, one thing lingers.
A gap.
A space that no testimony can fill. Because there are moments no one else witnessed. Seconds that only existed between two people in a quiet house on a calm morning. And those moments, no matter how much is revealed, remain incomplete. The verdict will come. Justice will take its course. But the story doesn't end there. Because long after the cameras leave, long after the headlines fade again, the street remains. The houses remain. The memory remains. And every time someone walks past that door, they remember. Not just what happened, but how easily it was hidden. How quietly it unfolded.
How long it stayed buried.
Until it didn't. Until the silence finally gave way. And the truth, patient, relentless, unavoidable, rose back to the surface. Waiting. All along. The courtroom feels colder than it should. Not because of the air, but because of what fills it. Every seat occupied, every eye fixed forward, the quiet hum of anticipation, thick, suffocating. This is no longer just a case file, no longer a headline. It's a story unfolding in real time, piece by piece, in front of people who once believed they lived somewhere safe. He sits at the defense table, shoulders slightly hunched, gaze forward but unfocused. The same man who once waved across driveways now avoids looking at the very people who trusted him. The same hands that carried groceries, fixed fences, helped neighbors, now rest still, almost rigid, as if any movement might reveal something deeper. The prosecution begins slowly. They don't rush. Because they don't need to.
They have time now.
They have evidence. And most importantly, they have a narrative that finally makes sense. March 1998 is reconstructed not as a mystery, but as a sequence. A morning like any other. A routine like any other. Until it wasn't. Photos appear on a screen. The house, the kitchen, the hallway where the faint smear once went unnoticed by everyone except a single observant officer. What was once dismissed as insignificant is now magnified, analyzed, understood. The jury leans forward.
Because now they know what that smear meant.
Now they know what it led to. Witnesses take the stand, one by one. Familiar faces aged by time and memory. Their voices carry hesitation, not because they doubt what they saw, but because they now question what they didn't. A neighbor recalls seeing him that morning. He was outside, just standing there, watching. At the time, it meant nothing. Now, it feels different. Another witness describes how he joined search parties, how he spoke softly, comforted others, offered help. He seemed concerned.
Concern.
That word lingers in the air longer than it should. Because concern can be genuine. Or it can be practiced. The prosecution moves carefully, building tension without raising their voice. Each detail placed with precision. Each testimony adding weight. Then comes the forensic expert. The room shifts. Because science doesn't speculate. It doesn't guess. It tells. DNA results are explained in clear terms. The partial profile, the familial link, the long wait, the eventual match, the narrowing of possibilities until only one remained.
Him.
The expert doesn't dramatize. Doesn't need to. The facts are enough. The jury watches closely, absorbing every word. Because this is the moment where doubt begins to fade, not completely, not instantly, but enough to change how everything else is seen. The defense rises. Their tone is different. Measured. Controlled. They don't deny the presence of DNA. They don't deny he was there. Instead, they reshape it. They argue context. They argue uncertainty. They argue that what happened was not planned, not intentional, not what it appears to be now after years of reconstruction and hindsight. They introduce the idea of an accident, A moment that spiraled. A situation misunderstood. Because in cases like this, the difference between guilt and innocence often lives in a single word: intent. The defense leans into it hard. They remind the jury that there were no witnesses to the act itself, no direct account of the final moments, only fragments, only interpretations, only a man's words, reshaped under pressure, years after the fact. And for a moment, the room hesitates. Because they're not entirely wrong. There are gaps. There are moments no one can fully recreate. Seconds that exist only in silence. But the prosecution is ready. They return with something heavier. Behavior. Not just what happened, but what followed. They describe the calm, the composure, the ability to stand beside grieving family members while holding the truth inside. They replay footage from old news archives. There he is, standing in the background, watching as reporters speak about the missing woman, nodding occasionally, speaking when asked, offering sympathy. The jury sees it now with new eyes. Not as a concerned neighbor, but as someone hiding something. Something enormous. The contrast is impossible to ignore. Because accidents don't usually lead to decades of silence. They don't lead to carefully constructed lies. They don't lead to burial. The word isn't spoken immediately. But it hangs there. Heavy. Unavoidable. Then, finally, the moment everyone has been waiting for. His recorded interrogation is played. The room goes still. Every movement stops. Every sound fades. Because this is where the story comes from him. Not interpretation. Not theory. His own voice. It starts calm. Controlled. But as the recording progresses, the cracks become visible. The pauses grow longer. The words less certain. The shifts in his story become undeniable. From not being there, to being there briefly, to an argument, to a fall, to something more. The jury listens carefully. Because this isn't just about what he says. It's about how he says it. The hesitation. The corrections. The way certain details emerge only when confronted. Truth doesn't usually arrive that way. Truth doesn't need to be adjusted. And as the recording reaches the part where he describes what happened after the room feels different again. Colder. Darker. Because that's where the weight truly settles. Not just the act, but the aftermath. The decision to hide. To bury. To return to normal life as if nothing had happened. To live beside the absence he created. For years. For decades. When the recording ends, no one speaks immediately. They don't need to. The silence says enough. The defense cross-examines. They challenge the pressure of interrogation. They suggest confusion. They suggest memory distortion after years of guilt and fear. They try to reframe the narrative once more. But the momentum has shifted. And it's difficult to bring it back. As the days pass, the trial becomes less about what happened and more about who he is. Character witnesses are called. People who knew him before. Who describe him as quiet, helpful, reliable. And for a moment, the image of the man returns, the one everyone thought they knew. But then the prosecution asks a simple question. Did you ever suspect he was capable of this? The answer is always the same. No. And that's the problem. Because neither did anyone else. Which means whatever he did, he hid it well. Too well. The final phase approaches. Closing arguments. The last chance to shape how the jury sees everything they've heard. The prosecution stands. They don't raise their voice. They don't need drama. They lay it out plainly. A timeline supported by evidence. A story supported by behavior. A pattern supported by silence. They remind the jury that while no one witnessed the exact moment, everything surrounding it points in one direction. And sometimes that's enough. The defense follows. They speak of doubt, of uncertainty, of the responsibility not to assume. They remind the jury that the burden of proof is absolute, that if there is even a single reasonable doubt, it must matter. Because in the end, this isn't about what feels right. It's about what can be proven. The jury leaves the room. And for the first time since the trial began, everything stops.
No testimony. No arguments.
Just waiting. Hours pass. Then more. The community holds its breath again, just like it did years ago. But this time, the question is different. Not what happened, but what now? When the jury returns, the room fills again. Faster this time. More tense. More fragile. He sits in the same place. But now, there's something else in his expression. Not fear. Not exactly. Something closer to inevitability. The verdict is read. And in that moment, everything that was once uncertain becomes final. But even as the words are spoken, even as the case reaches its legal conclusion, something lingers. Because closure is not the same as resolution. And justice doesn't erase memory. It doesn't rebuild what was taken. It doesn't silence the questions that remain. As people file out of the courtroom, as cameras capture reactions, as headlines begin forming once again, the story continues, but in a different way now. Quieter.
Heavier.
Because the truth, once buried, is now fully exposed. And the weight of it doesn't disappear. It settles. Into the walls of that house. Into the minds of those who lived nearby. Into the space between what was believed and what was real. And long after the verdict fades into history, one fact remains. It happened in plain sight. Hidden not by distance, but by trust. And that is what stays. The verdict echoes long after the words are spoken. Not loud, not explosive, just a single moment where everything shifts from uncertainty to permanence. The courtroom exhales, but it's not relief. It's something heavier, something quieter. A realization that this story, once a question mark, now carries a name, a face, and a truth that cannot be undone. He doesn't react immediately.
No outburst. No visible collapse.
Just a stillness. As if he already knew how this would end. The judge continues speaking, sentencing, procedure, formalities, but most of the room isn't listening anymore. Because the outcome has already settled into place, and everything else feels like detail. Behind him, someone cries. Soft at first, then harder. Years of waiting don't disappear in a single verdict. They condense. They tighten. They break open all at once. Across the aisle, the victim's family sits motionless.
No dramatic reactions. No visible triumph.
Just a quiet, exhausted presence. Because justice, when it finally arrives, rarely feels the way people expect it to. It doesn't restore. It doesn't return. It only confirms. And confirmation, after decades, carries its own kind of weight. Outside, the cameras are already waiting. Reporters rehearse lines under their breath. Producers signal cues. The moment the doors open, the story will begin again, but this time, it has an ending. Or, at least, something that looks like one. He's escorted out through a side exit.
No confrontation. No spectacle.
Just the sound of footsteps fading down a hallway that leads away from everything he once knew. The trusted neighbor. The familiar face. Now reduced to a case number, a conviction, a conclusion. But for the people who lived around him, the story doesn't close so neatly. Because they still have to return home. The street looks the same. That's what unsettles them the most. Same houses, same driveways, same quiet stretch of road where nothing seemed wrong for so long. But now, everything feels different. Curtains stay closed longer. Doors lock earlier. Neighbors don't linger outside the way they used to. Because once trust is broken like that, it doesn't come back easily. Sometimes it doesn't come back at all. The house becomes a focal point again. Not because anything new happens there, but because of what everyone now knows did. People slow down as they pass it. Some look, some don't. Some pretend it's just another house, but their eyes give them away. It's no longer just a place. It's a reminder of how close danger can be, of how easily it can hide, of how long it can wait. Inside the legal system, the case transitions into its final phase. Appeals are discussed, documents filed, arguments prepared, because even after conviction, the process continues slower, quieter, but still moving. His defense team works to challenge the outcome. They revisit the evidence,
question the methods,
look for anything that might reopen the door that just closed. But the foundation is strong now. Built on years of investigation. On science that didn't exist when the crime first occurred. On a narrative that finally aligns with the facts. And while the legal battle may continue, the story, as the public understands it, has already settled. Back in the community, something else begins. Not closure. Something more complicated. Conversations. People start talking again, but differently this time. Not in whispers, not in speculation, but in reflection. I remember when he helped me fix my fence. He used to wave every morning. He came to our barbecue once. Each memory now carries a shadow. Because every ordinary moment is being re-examined through an extraordinary truth. And that changes everything. For some, it brings guilt. A quiet, unspoken question that lingers beneath the surface. How did we not see it? But that question has no answer. Because there was nothing to see. That's the part that unsettles people the most. There were no obvious signs. No warning. No moment where everything suddenly made sense. Just a normal life hiding something unthinkable. The victim's story begins to re-emerge as well. Not as a disappearance, but as a life. Photos resurface. Videos. Old interviews with friends. Stories about who she was before everything changed. A mother. A neighbor. A presence in a community that once felt whole. Her voice, long absent, starts to return through the people who knew her. Through memories. Through details that had nothing to do with the case, but everything to do with who she was. And in those moments, the story shifts again. Because it's no longer just about what was done to her. It's about what was taken.
Time.
Years. Moments that never happened. A life interrupted in a way that can never be repaired. The media covers this part differently. Less urgency. Less speculation. More reflection. Because now, the mystery is gone. What remains is impact. And impact doesn't fade as quickly as headlines. The house eventually goes up for sale.
Quietly. No announcement.
No attention. Just a listing that appears like any other. But everyone knows, even those who didn't live there at the time. Because stories like this don't stay contained. They spread. They settle. They become part of the place itself. Potential buyers hesitate.
Some walk through.
Some don't. Because even if the walls are repainted, even if the floors are replaced, even if everything visible is new, something remains. Something unseen. Something that doesn't leave. Eventually, someone buys it. Life moves forward. It always does. But not in the same way. Not exactly. Because once something like this happens, the past doesn't disappear. It integrates. It becomes part of the environment. Part of the identity. Part of the story people tell, whether they want to or not. Years later, the case is studied.
Not just as a crime,
but as a timeline. A demonstration of how technology can reach back into the past and change it. How a single piece of evidence, once overlooked, can become the key to everything. How time doesn't erase truth. It delays it. Investigators who worked the original case look back differently now. Some feel vindicated. Some feel regret. All feel the weight of what was missed and what was finally found. Because solving a case decades later isn't just about success. It's about persistence. It's about the idea that even when something goes quiet, it's not over. Not really. The man at the center of it all fades from public view. Transferred. Processed. Placed into a system that removes him from the world he once lived in so easily. No more waving across driveways. No more quiet mornings on a familiar street. Just walls.
Bars. Time.
And for the rest of his life, that time will move differently. Measured not in days or routines, but in reflection. Because once everything is exposed, there's nowhere left to hide. But even as he disappears from view, the story doesn't. It remains. In conversations. In memories. In the subtle shift of how people see the world around them. Because this wasn't a crime committed in darkness. It happened in the open. In a place where nothing was supposed to happen. And it stayed hidden not because it was impossible to find, but because it was impossible to imagine. That's what lingers. Not just the act. Not just the outcome. But the realization that sometimes the most dangerous secrets aren't buried far away. They're right next door. Waiting. Unseen. Until something finally brings them into the light. And once they're there, they never fully leave. The story doesn't end with a verdict. It changes shape. What was once a question becomes a memory. What was once hidden becomes something people carry with them, quietly, in ways they don't always realize. Because a case like this doesn't just resolve, it settles into the fabric of a place. Weeks after the trial, the street is quieter than it's ever been. Not the peaceful kind of quiet it used to have. Not the comfortable silence of routine. This is different. This is the kind of quiet where people listen more than they speak. Where every sound, every car passing, every door closing, feels sharper. Because now, people are paying attention. They notice things they never noticed before. Who comes and goes. Who lingers too long. Who watches. Trust doesn't disappear overnight, but once it cracks, it never quite returns to what it was. And in this neighborhood, that crack runs deep. The house sits at the center of it all.
Still.
Unchanged on the outside. But everyone knows what it holds inside, not physically anymore, but historically, emotionally, permanently. It becomes something people refer to without naming directly. That house. No address needed. No explanation required. Everyone understands. And yet, life continues around it. Children walk past it on their way to school. Cars pull in and out of nearby driveways. Lawns are mowed. Mail is delivered. The routine returns, but it's layered now, carrying something heavier beneath it. Across town, the victim's family moves through a different kind of silence. One that isn't public. One that doesn't show up in headlines or camera shots. Because once the trial ends, the attention fades, but the reality doesn't. For them, this isn't closure. It's confirmation. And confirmation can be harder than uncertainty. Because uncertainty leaves room for hope. Even if it's small, even if it's unrealistic, hope still exists. But confirmation removes it entirely. It replaces possibility with finality. And finality is permanent. They begin the process of reclaiming something that was interrupted decades ago. Not the life they lost. That's gone. But the memory of it. They sort through old belongings, photographs, letters, things that have been untouched for years, not because they were forgotten, but because they were too difficult to face. Now they face them
carefully,
slowly, because every object carries weight. Every image brings back a version of the past that feels both close and unreachable at the same time. Friends reach out again. Some for the first time in years. Because the case, now resolved, gives them something they didn't have before, a way to talk about it. A way to acknowledge what happened without wondering how it might end. Stories are shared. Small ones. Moments that seem ordinary on the surface, but now feel significant because they're all that remains. The way she laughed. The way she greeted people. The way she moved through the world without knowing what was coming. And in those stories, something begins to shift. Because the narrative slowly moves away from how she died and back toward how she lived. It's not immediate. It doesn't happen all at once. But it happens. Meanwhile, investigators close the file. Formally. Procedurally. A case that once remained open for years is finally marked as solved. But even that word, solved, feels incomplete. Because solving a case answers questions. It doesn't erase impact. It doesn't remove the years of not knowing. It doesn't undo the fact that for decades, the truth existed without being seen. Still, there is a sense of completion. A line drawn between what was unknown and what is now understood. And for the detectives who carried this case, some from the beginning, others who picked it up later, it represents something rare. Resolution. Not perfect. Not clean. But real. They look back at the evidence differently now. That smear in the hallway. So small. So easy to overlook. And yet it became everything. A reminder that details matter. That even the smallest fragment of truth can survive time. Waiting. Preserved. Until someone finds a way to hear it. The advancements in DNA technology are discussed widely. Not just in this case, but in others like it. Because this isn't an isolated moment. It's part of a larger shift. A realization that the past is not as unreachable as it once seemed. That evidence doesn't expire. That time doesn't protect secrets the way it used to. And that changes how people see cases like this. Cold doesn't mean dead. Cold means waiting. Back in the neighborhood, new residents move in. People who weren't there in 1998. People who didn't experience the fear, the confusion, the years of uncertainty. They learn about it the way most people do now, through articles, conversations, fragments of a story that has already been told. And for them, it feels distant. Something that happened before they arrived. Something that belongs to the past. But even for them, there's a moment. A realization. Because when they stand outside their homes, when they look down the street, when they see how close everything is, they understand something fundamental. It didn't happen far away. It happened here. Close enough to touch. Close enough to feel. That proximity changes everything. The house eventually becomes lived in again. Not haunted. Not abandoned. Just occupied. Life moves through it once more. Different people. Different routines. Different sounds. But the past doesn't disappear. It integrates. Quietly. In ways that aren't always visible but are always there. For some, that's unsettling. For others, it's simply part of the reality of living in a place with history. Because every place has one. This one just happens to be known. Years pass. The case fades from headlines again. Not because it's forgotten, but because it's complete. Or as complete as something like this can be. It becomes a reference point. A story told in discussions about cold cases, about DNA, about how the smallest detail can change everything. It becomes an example. But for those who lived it, it's never just an example. It's personal. Always. And every so often, something brings it back. A documentary. An article. A mention in a conversation. And in those moments, the story resurfaces, not as a mystery, but as a memory. One that still carries weight. One that still leaves an impression. Because even when everything is known, even when every question has an answer, there's something that remains. A feeling. A realization that lingers beneath the surface. That what happened wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. It was quiet. Ordinary. Hidden within the kind of day no one would ever think to remember. And that's what makes it stay. Not just the crime. Not just the outcome. But the simplicity of how it began. A normal morning. A familiar face. A moment that seemed like nothing. Until it became everything. And somewhere in that memory, somewhere between what was seen and what was missed, the truth waited. Patient. Silent. Unmoving. Until time caught up with it. And once it did, it changed everything that came after. The years after the conviction reveal something investigators already knew, but the public often forgets. A solved case does not mean a forgotten case. Some stories disappear once the final headline is published. Others remain because they expose something deeper than a single crime. They reveal the fragile line between ordinary life and unimaginable tragedy. The California 1998 cold case becomes one of those stories. A case remembered not only because of what happened, but because of where it happened. A quiet neighborhood. A familiar street. A person everyone believed they knew. That is what continues to disturb people. Not the idea that danger exists somewhere far away, but the possibility that it can exist beside you. For years, investigators had searched for a stranger. Someone passing through. Someone unknown. But the truth was much closer. And that realization changes the way communities look at themselves. After the trial, detectives return to the evidence one final time. Not because they doubt the outcome. Because cases like this leave behind questions that never completely disappear. They review every report from 1998. Every interview. Every handwritten note. Every piece of information collected during those first chaotic days. And what they find is something both frustrating and fascinating. The clues were there. Not obvious. Not complete. But present. The case was never empty. It was waiting for the right moment. The right technology. The right connection. The hallway stain. The inconsistent statements. The small details that seemed meaningless when viewed alone. Together, they formed a picture. A picture hidden for decades. This is the reality of cold cases. They are not always mysteries without evidence. Sometimes they are mysteries trapped behind time. Technology becomes the bridge between then and now. The DNA profile that once produced nothing suddenly becomes the most important piece of the entire investigation. A microscopic trace. Something invisible to the human eye. Something that survived while memories faded. While witnesses aged. While the world changed. The evidence remained. And that idea becomes one of the most powerful lessons from the case. Time can hide the truth, but it cannot always destroy it. For the forensic teams involved, the case represents something larger than a single conviction. It becomes a reminder of why old evidence matters. Why forgotten files are reopened. Why investigators continue looking even when years pass without answers. Because somewhere inside those old boxes, inside those old reports, inside those silent pieces of evidence, there may still be a voice waiting to be heard. The victim's family understands this better than anyone. For them, the DNA match is not just science. It is the moment decades of uncertainty finally break. For years, they lived between two impossible realities. One where they hoped. One where they feared. They woke up every morning carrying the same unanswered questions. Where was she? What happened? Who knew the truth? Those questions followed them through birthdays, through holidays, through years when life continued moving forward while a part of them remained frozen. The conviction does not erase that. Nothing can. But it changes the weight they carry. The uncertainty is gone. And sometimes, knowing the truth, even a painful truth, is different from living inside an endless unknown. The community also changes. People begin talking about safety differently. Not with panic. With awareness. The story becomes a reminder that trust should not mean blindness. That kindness and familiarity can exist alongside hidden realities. And that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it looks ordinary. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it offers help. That is the part people struggle with the most. Because everyone wants to believe they would notice. They would see the signs. They would know. But the truth is more complicated. Most people are not trained to look for darkness in familiar places. They are trained to believe. And belief is what allows communities to function. Without trust, everyday life becomes impossible. The tragedy is not that people trusted. The tragedy is that someone used that trust. Years after the case is solved, former neighbors continue to describe the same feeling. A strange mixture of relief and discomfort. Relief because the truth finally came out. Discomfort because the truth was so close all along. They remember ordinary conversations. Small interactions. Moments that once seemed meaningless. A greeting. A short conversation. A passing encounter. Now, every memory has changed. Not because those moments were different, but because they're seen differently. That is one of the cruelest parts of crimes like this. They rewrite the past. They force people to revisit memories and question what they thought they understood. The neighborhood becomes a place with two histories. the one people lived before the truth was known, and the one they carry afterward. Same streets. Same houses. Different meaning. The case also attracts attention from investigators and researchers who study criminal behavior. Not because the crime is unique, but because the circumstances reveal a disturbing pattern. The ability to appear normal. The ability to maintain relationships. The ability to separate one part of life from another. It raises difficult questions about human behavior. How can someone hide such a secret? How can someone return to routine? How can someone interact with people who are searching for answers they already know? There are no simple explanations. Only uncomfortable realities. Human beings are complicated. And sometimes the most frightening mysteries are not about what people do. They are about how long they can pretend they didn't. The case eventually becomes part of a larger conversation about forensic technology, about the future of investigations, about how many other cold cases may still hold answers. Because every year, more evidence becomes searchable, more connections become possible, more names emerge from shadows. The lesson becomes clear. A case can go silent. But silence is not the same as ending. For detectives working future cases, this investigation becomes motivation. A reminder that patience matters. That persistence matters. That a victim's story deserves to be completed, no matter how much time has passed. Because every cold case represents someone. Someone who had a family. Someone who had plans. Someone whose life was interrupted. The files may become numbers. The evidence may become labels. But behind all of it is a person. And that person deserves answers. The California 1998 case eventually leaves the news cycle. The cameras disappear. The interviews stop. The headlines move on to something else. That is how the world works. Attention moves quickly. But memory moves differently. For those connected to the case, the story never becomes old. It simply becomes part of their lives. A chapter they never chose. A chapter they never wanted. But one they must carry. And perhaps that is the final mystery surrounding cases like this. Not how they remain unsolved, but how people survive while waiting for them to be solved. How families continue. How communities recover. How life keeps moving even when one question remains unanswered. Because behind every cold case is a period of silence. A period when nobody knows. When everyone wonders. When hope and fear exist together. And then, sometimes years later, a single piece of evidence breaks through. A forgotten clue returns. A hidden truth rises. And suddenly, the past is no longer silent. It speaks. And when it does, the entire world listens. The most difficult part of a cold case is not always finding the truth. Sometimes it is accepting it. For decades, the California 1998 disappearance existed in a space between reality and uncertainty. A place where questions lived longer than answers. Where family members woke up every morning carrying the same impossible thought. Maybe today. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe someone knows something. But when the truth finally arrives, it does not come gently. It arrives like a storm. And storms leave damage behind. Years after the conviction, the community begins to understand that solving the case created a new chapter, not an ending. The mystery was gone, but the impact remained. The street where everything began continued to exist. Cars still passed. Neighbors still walked. Children still played outside. But beneath the normal rhythm of everyday life was a memory that refused to disappear. A reminder that one ordinary morning had changed everything. Investigators who worked the case often described the investigation as a battle against time. Because time was the enemy. Time changed faces. Time changed memories. Time changed evidence. People moved away. Witnesses forgot details. Documents aged. Technology changed. But the one thing that never changed was the need for answers. And that need kept the case alive. When the DNA breakthrough finally happened, many people focused on the technology, the science, the database, the match. But behind that discovery was something less visible. Persistence. Years of people refusing to close the file permanently. Years of investigators believing that somewhere inside the evidence was a truth that had not yet been uncovered. That belief became the difference between an unsolved mystery and a solved crime. The forensic breakthrough also changed the way people viewed the original investigation. Some wondered how the case remained unsolved for so long. Others understood the reality. In 1998, investigators were working with what they had. The tools were different. The information was limited. The world was different. A clue that seems obvious today may have looked meaningless decades earlier. That is the cruel nature of hindsight. It makes the past look clearer than it actually was. But investigators know something most people don't. A case is not solved by one perfect clue. It is solved by thousands of small decisions. One person noticing something. Another person preserving something. Someone years later asking one more question. That is how the truth survives. The victim's family begins a different journey after the trial. A journey away from courtrooms and evidence rooms. A journey toward remembrance. For years, the case had consumed every conversation. Every holiday. Every important moment. The disappearance became the center of everything. But after justice was delivered, they wanted something else. They wanted people to remember who she was. Not just what happened. This becomes one of the most important changes in the aftermath of the case. The victim is no longer introduced through tragedy. She is remembered through life. Through photographs. Through stories. Through the people who loved her. Friends describe her personality. Her habits. The small things that made her unique. The details that never appeared in police reports. Because a crime file can describe an event. But only memories can describe a person. And that distinction matters. For years, the world knew her as someone missing. Someone connected to a mystery. Someone whose absence created headlines.
But she was always more than that.
She was someone with dreams. Someone with relationships. Someone whose future was stolen. And bringing that back into focus becomes part of the healing process. Meanwhile, the legal system continues to deal with the aftermath. Appeals are reviewed. Arguments are examined. Every conviction creates another stage of legal scrutiny. Because justice is not only about finding someone responsible. It is also about proving that the process was fair. The defense continues to challenge aspects of the case. They question evidence handling. They question interpretations. They question whether the passage of time affected the investigation. But the foundation remains strong. The evidence. The timeline. The statements. The physical connection. Piece by piece, the case holds together. And, eventually, the conviction stands. The finality brings a strange feeling to everyone involved. Not celebration. Not happiness. Something more complicated. A quiet acknowledgement. The truth is known. The responsibility is established. The questions that haunted people for years finally have answers. But answers do not erase memories. They simply give those memories a place to rest. The neighborhood also changes in ways no official report can measure. People become more aware of their surroundings. They talk more openly. They share stories about the case with new generations who were not alive when it happened. And every time the story is told, the same lesson appears. Appearances can be deceiving. The person who seems safest may not always be. The person everyone trusts may still hold secrets. It is an uncomfortable lesson. One people would rather avoid. But it is also one that keeps communities alert. The case becomes part of a larger national conversation about cold cases. About how many families are still waiting. How many answers remain hidden. How many pieces of evidence are sitting somewhere untouched. Because every solved cold case creates another question. How many more are possible? How many families are still waiting for their moment? How many truths are still buried beneath years of silence? Advances in forensic science continue to change investigations. DNA technology becomes faster, more accurate, more accessible. Cases once considered impossible begin reopening. Old evidence receives new attention. And suddenly, decades are no longer an absolute barrier. The past becomes searchable. The forgotten becomes discoverable. The impossible becomes possible. But technology alone is not enough. Because behind every breakthrough is a human decision. Someone choosing to look again. Someone choosing not to give up. Someone believing that every victim deserves a voice. That belief is what connects generations of investigators. The ones who started the case. And the ones who finished it. Different people. Different decades. Same mission. Find the truth. The man convicted in the case eventually becomes a distant figure. His name remains connected to what happened, but his presence fades. The public moves forward. The media moves forward. The world moves forward. But the consequences remain. For him. For the family. For the community. For everyone who learned that the person living nearby was not who they thought. And perhaps that is the most haunting part of the entire story. Not that a crime happened. Crime happens every day. What makes this case unforgettable is the illusion before it happened. The normal days. The friendly conversations. The ordinary moments that existed right beside something terrible. Because the most disturbing mysteries are not always hidden in dark places. Sometimes they exist in places filled with sunlight. Places where people wave hello. Places where everyone knows your name. Places where nobody thinks they need to be afraid. The California 1998 cold case eventually becomes a story of science. A story of investigation. A story of justice. But more than anything, it becomes a story about time. Time that failed to erase the truth. Time that carried evidence forward. Time that eventually forced a secret into the open. Because time can bury many things. But it cannot bury everything. Somewhere beneath the silence, beneath the years, beneath every unanswered question, the truth was always waiting. And eventually, it was found. The final truth of a cold case is rarely the moment everyone imagines. People expect a dramatic ending, a confession, a shocking revelation, a single moment where everything suddenly makes sense. But real endings are often quieter. They arrive slowly, through documents, through evidence, through memories that have waited years to be understood. And in the California 1998 case, the truth did not emerge from one explosive discovery. It emerged from patience. From years of unanswered questions. From a trail of small details that refused to disappear. Long after the courtroom doors closed, investigators continued studying the case, not because they doubted the conviction, but because every cold case leaves behind something more than evidence. It leaves behind lessons,
Mistakes.
warnings, patterns. And sometimes, those lessons become more important than the crime itself. The first lesson was about assumptions. In the beginning, everyone searched for someone unknown. A stranger. An outsider. Someone who appeared dangerous. But the answer was not outside the community. It was inside it. That realization changed everything. Because people naturally imagine threats as something separate. Something easy to identify. Something that looks suspicious. But the reality is often much more complicated. The person who caused the greatest damage was not someone who arrived from nowhere. He was someone people recognized. Someone they greeted. Someone they trusted. That contradiction became the detail people remembered most. The neighbor who seemed ordinary. The person who blended into the background. The face that never attracted attention. Until it did. Years after the case was solved, former investigators spoke about the importance of looking beyond appearances. Not because everyone should be treated as a suspect, but because investigations cannot depend on comfort. They must depend on evidence. And evidence does not care about reputation. It does not care how friendly someone appears. It does not care how many people believe they know someone. Evidence only tells what happened. And eventually that evidence spoke. The DNA match became the symbol of the entire investigation. A small biological trace that survived years of uncertainty. A piece of information so tiny that it could fit almost anywhere. Yet powerful enough to change everything. For many people following the case, the DNA breakthrough felt almost impossible. How could something so small solve something so large? But that is exactly why forensic science changed criminal investigations. Because crimes are often made of small moments. A touch. A movement.
A mistake.
A trace left behind. The smallest things can carry the biggest answers. The case becomes part of a larger wave of investigations where old evidence is given new life. Files that once sat untouched are reopened. Evidence once considered limited becomes valuable. Families who were told they might never know the truth suddenly receive phone calls they thought would never come. And every solved case creates the same emotional moment. The phone rings. Someone answers. And a voice says the words they have waited years to hear. We have new information. Those words can change a life. For families, they bring fear.
Hope. And sometimes both at the same time.
Because after years of waiting, answers are not always easy to accept. Hope can survive uncertainty. But truth requires acceptance. The victim's family understands this better than anyone. They waited through seasons. Through years. Through moments when the world continued moving while they remained connected to one unanswered question. The conviction gives them something they never had before. A complete story. Not the story they wanted. Not the story they deserved. But the story that happened. And with that truth comes a different kind of healing. Not forgetting. Never forgetting. But learning how to carry the memory without being destroyed by the uncertainty. The community experiences its own transformation. The neighborhood that once represented safety becomes something more complicated. It becomes a reminder. A place where people learned that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind routine, behind kindness, behind familiarity. That realization changes how people think. Not just about this case, about all cases, about the people around them, about the things they assume. Because human beings are naturally drawn to simple explanations. Good people, bad people, safe places, dangerous places. But reality rarely fits into perfect categories. The California 1998 case breaks that illusion. It shows that darkness can exist beside normal life. That tragedy can happen during ordinary moments. That the most shocking stories are sometimes hidden inside the most ordinary settings. As the years continue, the case becomes studied by new investigators. Young detectives who were not involved when it first happened. People who were not there during the original search. People who know the story only through files. To them, it becomes a lesson in persistence. They study every decision, every mistake, every breakthrough. They learn that solving a cold case is not about one person having all the answers. It is about many people refusing to stop asking questions. The original investigators are remembered too. Not as people who failed because the case remained unsolved, but as people who kept the foundation alive. Because without those early efforts, there would have been nothing for future technology to discover. Every report mattered. Every photograph mattered. Every piece of evidence preserved mattered. The solution came decades later. But the investigation began on day one. That is something often forgotten. Cold cases are not solved by magic. They are solved by continuity, by connecting the past with the present, by allowing one generation of investigators to continue the work of another. And perhaps the most important lesson from the case is this. Time does not always belong to the person hiding the truth. Sometimes time belongs to the truth itself. For years, the person responsible lived believing the secret would remain buried. Believing the passage of time created protection. Believing that silence was enough. But silence is not permanent. It only lasts until someone asks the right question. Until someone looks again. Until someone finds what was missed before. The world has changed dramatically since 1998. Technology changed. Communities changed. Investigations changed. But one thing remained constant. The need for answers. Because behind every cold case is a person who never received justice. A family that never received peace. A community that never received understanding. That is why these cases continue to matter. Not because they are mysteries, but because they are unfinished stories. And every unfinished story deserves an ending. The California 1998 case finally receives that ending. But even after the evidence is presented, even after the verdict is delivered, even after the headlines fade, something remains. A question that stays with everyone who hears the story. How many other secrets are still waiting? How many other cold cases are sitting quietly? How many answers are still hidden inside evidence that has not yet been examined? The future will reveal some of them. Technology will uncover some of them. Investigators will solve some of them. But others may remain silent, waiting. Just like this case waited. For years. For decades. Until one day, a forgotten piece of evidence finally connected the past to the present. And when it did, the silence ended. The mystery disappeared. And the truth finally stepped into the light. The lingering echoes of this historic California cold case resolution continue to reverberate powerfully through the modern landscape of criminal investigation, serving as a beacon of unwavering hope for thousands of grieving families across the United States who still wait anxiously in the dark for the miraculous day when their own cold cases might finally be unraveled by the relentless march of technological innovation, the chilling trajectory of the 1998 murder, from a frantic midnight 911 call and a paralyzed suburban neighborhood. Through 2 decades of painful administrative silence and dusty archives, all the way to a stunning genetic genealogy breakthrough and a courtroom face-off with a trusted neighbor, has permanently altered how law enforcement agencies approach unsolved violent crimes. It stands as an enduring, undeniable testament to the core truth that time is not an absolute shield for the guilty, and that no matter how meticulously a predator constructs a facade of ordinary domestic respectability, the microscopic biological traces they leave behind can lie dormant for generations only to awaken with devastating precision when science finally catches up to their wickedness. The anonymous tipsters, the visionary forensic geneticists, and the stubborn cold case detectives who refuse to let the file gather dust forever have written their names into the annals of criminal justice history, proving beyond all shadow of a doubt that the dead do not remain forever voiceless, so long as there are still living hands willing to fight for their memory, as police academies and university criminology departments across the country update their textbooks to study this landmark investigation as a shining paradigm of modern police work. The convicted murderer sits in complete, agonizing isolation within the gray, concrete confines of a maximum security prison cell, serving out his life sentence as a living warning to anyone who believes they can outrun the long arm of the law. And for the quiet suburban streets of Northern California, where the nightmare first began, the terrifying ghost of 1998 has finally been laid to rest, replaced by a sobering yet comforting reminder that even in the quietest, most idyllic corners of our modern world, the light of truth will always find a way to pierce through the densest shadows, ensuring that justice, though sometimes devastatingly slow, never truly forgets its name. The reverberations of that monumental courtroom victory and the subsequent lifelong confinement of the convicted killer continued to echo far beyond the immediate borders of Northern California, transforming the very philosophy with which modern law enforcement agencies approach the vast, desolate landscape of unsolved homicides across the nation. Prosecutors and high-ranking state officials held high-profile symposiums and national press conferences where they openly dissected every intricate phase of the 1998 cold case investigation, using it as a gold standard textbook blueprint to demonstrate how the marriage of genetic genealogy, familial DNA database sweeps, and old-fashioned tenacious police work could successfully dismantle the seemingly impenetrable walls of ancient, forgotten crimes. Investigative reporters from major television networks and premier investigative journalism podcasts descended upon the region, producing multi-part deep dives, documentary specials, and long-form written features that captured the global imagination. Fascinated by the sheer cinematic irony of a violent predator hiding successfully in plain sight as a respected, neighborly figure for over 2 decades while his victim's family suffered in an unyielding purgatory of silence. Inside these investigative retrospectives, criminologists emphasize the terrifying psychological profile of the perpetrator, a textbook example of a compartmentalized sociopath who maintained an unblemished social front by day while nursing the dark, secret satisfaction of having outsmarted the entire legal apparatus of the late 20th century. The public fascination was fueled not merely by the macabre details of the original 1998 crime scene, but by the deeply unsettling realization that the suburban sanctuary so many Americans take for granted is porous, fragile, and uniquely vulnerable to betrayal from within. Neighbors across the country began looking at their own cul-de-sacs with a newfound, jaundiced eye of caution, wondering silently if their own polite, mild-mannered neighbors possessed hidden pasts or dark secrets locked away behind tightly shuttered windows. Meanwhile, inside the state correctional facilities, the reality of the verdict set in with brutal finality for the man who had traded his freedom for a 22-year masquerade of lies, stripped of his comfortable suburban home, his daily routines, and his carefully guarded anonymity. He occupied a concrete segregation cell where his world was reduced to 4 cold walls, a steel bunk, and the relentless, deafening silence of his own conscience. security guards, and institutional psychologists noted his total withdrawal from interaction, observing a man utterly crushed by the sudden, cataclysmic reversal of fortune that proved time does not heal all wounds, nor does it grant perpetual immunity to those who shed innocent blood under the cover of night. For the community of Northern California that had lived under the heavy shadow of the unresolved 1998 tragedy, the conclusion of the legal saga offered a profound, collective exhale, transforming the town's legacy from one defined by an open, bleeding wound into a resilient testament of hope, patience, and the unyielding pursuit of accountability. Memorials erected by family members were visited not with the heavy burden of hopeless despair, but with a quiet, hard-won peace born from the knowledge that the name of their lost loved one was finally vindicated in a court of law. As the dust settled over the courtroom and the daily news cycles shifted toward fresh horizons, the legacy of the California cold case remained permanently seared into the cultural consciousness, serving as an eternal reminder that no matter how many years pass, how many seasons change, or how dusty a case file becomes in the municipal archives, the truth possesses an unstoppable gravity of its own, waiting patiently in the dark for the exact moment when science, courage, and determination converge to drag it screaming into the brilliant, unforgiving light of absolute justice. As the final chapters of this harrowing and complex criminal saga draw to a close, casting a long, contemplative shadow over the entire architecture of modern American jurisprudence, the profound lessons embedded within the miraculous resolution of the 1998 Northern California cold case continue to resonate with an urgent, undeniable clarity that will undoubtedly shape the future of homicide investigations for generations yet unborn. The chilling journey from that frantic midnight emergency call in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, through more than 2 decades of suffocating administrative silence, dusty evidence lockers, and agonizing grief for surviving loved ones, all the way to a stunning genetic genealogy breakthrough and a courtroom face-to-face confrontation with a trusted, smiling neighbor, stands as an eternal testament to the indomitable power of human persistence and the relentless evolution of forensic science. It proves conclusively that time is never an absolute shield for those who commit heinous acts under the cover of darkness, and that no matter how meticulously a predator constructs a facade of ordinary domestic respectability, the microscopic biological footprints they leave behind possess an immortal voice that will eventually awaken when technology finally catches up to their wickedness. The visionary forensic scientists, the dedicated cold case detectives, and the grieving family members who refuse to let the file gather dust in the shadows have permanently rewritten the rules of engagement between law enforcement and those who seek to evade accountability, demonstrating that the pursuit of truth is a sacred obligation that transcends the boundaries of decades and bureaucratic hurdles. As police academies, forensic laboratories, and university criminology departments across the globe incorporate this landmark investigation into their core curricula as a shining paradigm of modern investigative excellence, the convicted murderer sits in complete, agonizing isolation within the gray, unforgiving confines of a maximum security prison cell, serving out his life sentence as a living, breathing warning to anyone who believes they can forever outrun the long arm of the law. And for the tranquil, sun-bleached neighborhoods of Northern California, where the nightmare first took root, the terrifying ghost of 1998 has finally been laid to rest, replaced by a sobering yet deeply comforting reminder that even in the quietest, most idyllic corners of our modern world, the light of truth will always find a way to pierce through the densest shadows, ensuring that justice, though sometimes devastatingly slow in its arrival, never truly forgets its name, its purpose, or its eternal commitment to the victims who can no longer speak for themselves. And while the lingering shockwaves of that historic courtroom verdict continue to reverberate through the legal corridors and academic halls of criminal justice institutions across the nation, the overarching legacy of the 1998 Northern California cold case stretches far beyond the immediate boundaries of a single courtroom victory, cementing itself permanently as a transformative watershed moment in the ongoing evolution of modern law enforcement. The ripple effects of this remarkable investigation have fundamentally altered how State and federal agencies allocate resources, reevaluate shelved homicide files, and integrate cutting-edge biotechnological innovations into their everyday operational protocols. Law enforcement executives and policymakers have increasingly turned their attention toward the vast, silent libraries of archived evidence boxes sitting in municipal basements, recognizing that within those dusty cardboard containers lie thousands of sleeping answers waiting for the inevitable day when next-generation sequencing and familial DNA databases will finally bridge the fatal gap between anonymity and accountability. The unprecedented success of utilizing genetic genealogy to unmask a trusted suburban neighbor who hid in plain sight for more than 22 years has shattered old paradigms, proving conclusively to criminal investigators that no suspect can ever truly rely on the passage of time as a foolproof insurance policy against exposure. Criminologists and behavioral psychologists examining the case have pointed repeatedly to the terrifying duality of the perpetrator's existence. A man capable of committing an act of savage, premeditated violence under the cover of night, while simultaneously maintaining an immaculate facade of mundane community respectability, attending local gatherings, waving across manicured lawns, and sharing casual conversations with the very people whose lives he had covertly shattered. This chilling psychological profile has forced suburban communities nationwide to re-examine their own definitions of safety, shaking the foundational illusion that evil always wears the recognizable face of an outside stranger or an itinerant vagrant. Instead, the harrowing narrative of the trusted neighbor-turned-monster serves as a permanent, sobering reminder that the greatest dangers sometimes reside directly beside us, hidden behind closed doors and masked by the comfortable routines of everyday domesticity. For the forensic science community, the breakthrough has sparked a massive surge in research and funding aimed at recovering viable genetic profiles from severely degraded, touch-compromised, and ancient biological samples that previous generations of investigators had long written off as hopeless dead ends. University laboratories are now collaborating directly with cold case squads to pioneer even more sensitive extraction techniques, pushing the absolute boundaries of what microscopic cellular remnants can reveal about a perpetrator's identity decades after the crime scene tape has been torn down and forgotten. Furthermore, the legal frameworks surrounding genetic genealogy and familial database searching have matured significantly in the wake of this landmark trial, establishing clear, constitutional boundaries that balance individual privacy expectations with the overriding societal imperative to bring violent criminals to justice. Civil liberties advocates, prosecutors, and judges have engaged in rigorous, continuous dialogue to ensure that these powerful new tools are wielded with absolute transparency, strict judicial oversight, and unwavering adherence to due process, ensuring that future convictions remain constitutionally bulletproof against appellate challenges. Meanwhile, for the dedicated detectives, forensic analysts, and prosecutors who poured their professional lives into reviving a dormant investigation that many considered completely dead, their collective triumph stands as the ultimate vindication of professional persistence, proving that the most rewarding victories in law enforcement often belong to those who refuse to surrender to despair when a case goes cold. The psychological relief experienced by the surviving family members, though tempered by decades of irreplaceable loss, remains a powerful testament to the emotional necessity of closure, demonstrating that knowing the absolute truth, however painful and devastating it may be, is infinitely preferable to living in an endless purgatory of unanswered questions and institutional abandonment, as the historical case files are. Finally archived with their permanent stamps of complete resolution, they no longer represent a monument to systemic failure or unsolved tragedy, but rather a shining beacon of hope for thousands of grieving families across America who still wait in the dark for their own miraculous breakthroughs. The legacy of the 1998 California homicide will thus endure for generations, teaching every new recruit entering the police academy that the pursuit of truth is a sacred, unbroken chain of human responsibility that transcends decades, bridges technological divides, and ultimately ensures that no victim of violent crime is ever truly forgotten by history.